Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Hayley Eber. I'm the Acting Dean of the Erwin S. Channon School of Architecture. And on behalf of the Cooper Union and the Architecture League, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our historic Great Hall and apologize profusely for the late start due to the extremely thorough check-in process upstairs. This evening I have been tasked with introducing our moderator and fellow interim dean, Quilian Riano, who in turn will introduce the members of Mass Design Group. But before I do that, I would like to express my enthusiasm in welcoming Mass to the Cooper Union, whose multidisciplinary collective is an aspirational model offering architectural and design services that are accessible, inclusive, and focused on the communities that need them most. With equal excitement, I would like to introduce Quilian Riano, who is the Interim Dean of Pratt Institute's School of Architecture, while also serving as the Architecture League's Vice President for Architecture. Quilian founded and leads Design Agency, a design studio exploring new forms of political design, processes, and engagement through architecture, urbanism, landscape, and art. Design Agency believes that radical pluralistic democracy can only come about through collaborations, cooperatives, and co-creations, while encouraging negotiations, conversations, and acts of community making. In addition, Quilian is an initiator and core member of Dark Matter University, a democratic network committed to creating new forms of knowledge and knowledge production, institutions, collectivity practice, design, and community culture. On a personal note, I have had the privilege of co-teaching a design studio with Quilian a few years ago up at Columbia, and I always found Quilian to be patient, perceptive, and provocative, and look forward to the insights he will bring to this extraordinary body of work through his moderation of the discussion this evening. So with that, please welcome Quilian Riano.
Hi, good evening, and thank you so much for a very kind introduction, Hayley. And it is wild that we both co-taught a course with 7 people total, and the two of us would often do desk crits and other things together, and I really always enjoyed it, and similarly, thank you so much. I also want to thank Cooper Union for hosting us, the Architectural League of New York for bringing it also together, and of course, Mass. I'm very proud of being the vice president for architecture of the league, and what we're going to be doing today is something that the league is beginning to do more and more, which is having conversations around models of practice that potentially can help us meet this moment. It is clear that architectural design right now is having to meet in a moment of environmental and social justice crises. How to meet that is unclear. It has happened before, as we often talk about at Pratt and in 1968, etc. But at this moment, what are the potential practices? And I know the league a couple of weeks ago hosted La Col, a cooperative and collective from Barcelona, to begin to talk about that and create an international conversation. Other practices are going to be invited as well. This evening we have the great pleasure of having Mass, and a Mass that is beginning to show us the collective that it has always been. We're going to be chatting with about a quarter, so we're going to have 7 people on stage, and it's about a quarter of the total principles that they have. Principles that have overlapping and distinct interests, but they all come together and work together. And those are the things that we're going to be talking about. Practices that are finding ways to have multiple voices, yet have conversations, be able to move forward together, democratic systems, as well as potentially new models. One of the questions and one of the potential themes is going to be North-South collaborations, entrepreneurial models, potentially tech-driven kind of ideas around the way practice works. In the spirit of tonight, I also want to say and welcome and thank the Architectural League Executive Director, Rosalie Ginevra, who's always been there, putting this. Program Director Ann Risselback, Program Manager Rafi Lehman, Program and Communications Associate Alicia Botero, and of course our Board President Mario Gooden. As well as all the league board and staff that I see a lot. There's a lot of us here, so thank you all. I think part of the practice of collaboration is to thank everyone that makes these things possible. So a little bit about MAS. MAS is it's an acronym, and it stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society Design Group. Was founded in 2008 as a nonprofit organization with the mission to research, design, build, and advocate for architecture that promotes justice and human dignity, with offices across the US and headquarters in Boston and Kigali, Rwanda. The organization traverses geographic, typological, and disciplinary boundaries. Since its founding, MAS has grown to a team of over 200 architects, landscape architects, engineers, builders, furniture designers, writers, filmmakers, and researchers representing 20 countries across the globe. Very excited, for example, to talk a little bit more about the role of film narrative into the work that they're doing. Tonight, as I mentioned, you will see about a quarter of the total principals that MAS has, many of them that are here, but we're gonna keep it small there. We're gonna hear a little bit from Jadi Amazi, who's a principal in the Boston office and directs the Public Memory and Memorials Lab. Christian Benimana, a senior principal and managing director in the Kigali office. Jonathan Evans, who's a principal in the Boston office and leads the practices affordable housing portfolio. Patricia Gruits, who's a senior principal and a managing director focused on supporting the MAS North American studio. Jeffrey Mansfield, who's a principal in the Boston office and leads the group's Deaf Space and Disability Justice Lab. Paul Sebuhayi Uwase, who's a principal in MAS's Kigali office. And finally, Caitlin Taylor, who's the principal of the Poughkeepsie office and directs the Food Systems Design Lab. So let's get ready to talk about collaboration tonight, models of practice, potentially finances. How does this all work? How to work with 28 principles. How does that happen? North-South relationships. What are we learning from the Global South? What the potential of roles in design and addressing this big scale. So with that, please join me welcoming the MAS Design. And I feel Patricia's first.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to confirm before I start. Am I good to start? Or is there a video? There's a video. Who wants to see a video? All right, I'm going to go sit back down.
justice is beauty.
Thank you all. Thanks for indulging us in a little bit of fun and celebration of our team and who's here tonight. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Patricia Gruits. I am a co-executive director and senior principal at Mass. Thank you first to the Architecture League and to the Cooper Union. We are really glad to be here with you tonight, representing Mass and a team of over 200 architects, landscape architects, engineers, filmmakers, and change makers across the world. I'll be joined on stage today by my colleagues Christian, John Paul, Jonathan, Jadi, Jeffrey, and Caitlin. As Quilian mentioned, only 6 of our 27-person leadership team. And we will all share with you how we work as a nonprofit and together as a collective. Each of us will share the work of our diverse teams, the disciplines we represent, the partnerships we hold across geographies. But fundamentally, what connects us together is the belief in the power of design to create transformational change. A foundation of our practice is the idea from Dr. Paul Farmer, who in delivering healthcare services globally through his own organization, Partners in Health, believed that equity meant providing a preferential treatment for the poor. He believed that the most marginalized among us deserved the best. It requires us going beyond the bare minimum. It instead confirms for us that we must prioritize humanity and seek abundance. And this is the title of our lecture tonight and our talk, to really celebrate the abundance of work we do, the abundance of enough and ample resources to go around, ample successes for us all to share in, and ample joy for us all to feel. This is what we want to share with you tonight, how this mindset shift from deprivation to abundance is rooted in our work across the globe and also in our practice as a celebration of our team and the diverse perspectives that make Mass possible. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Christian Benimana, who will share more about himself and how this philosophy of practice grew out of and continues to draw inspiration from our work in Rwanda. Christian.
Thanks, Patricia. Greetings, everybody. Thanks for coming to listen to us. Our work in Rwanda was born out of and inspired by the idea that we find ourselves at a time where we must find unconventional solutions to the challenges facing the world currently. We have benefited from an environment in that country that is committed to innovation and investing in the future than trying to replicate what has happened in the past. We have expanded to over 100 people in our Kigali office studio alone, with an increasingly interdisciplinary team. And in the past 2 years alone, we've built more work in Rwanda than in our first decade of work combined. We completed 2 referral hospitals projects, 3 ground-up university campuses, a research center for the mountain gorillas that live in the Volcanoes National Park in the north of Rwanda, and we've inaugurated the largest entrepreneurship hub of East Africa, as far as we know, that is in the middle of the city of Kigali, and it's called the Norsken House. And this is amazing. Why? Because up until I finished high school, there was no school of architecture in that country. There was not even a word in our local language that means architect. I moved and lived in China for 9 years, between 2001 and 2010, to study architecture in Mandarin. I moved back to Rwanda in 2010. And from that time, I was a witness, my country going through one of the most rapid developments of any nation in history. If you don't know much about Rwanda, after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, the country was decimated. We had to rebuild it from scratch, literally. And the government made a very intentional decision to invest heavily in rebuilding the country, particularly in the health and education sector. We know that we are always working with or against systems. And we've been designing and building at the scale of the ecosystem all the way to the scale of the production of pieces of furniture and hardware. Last year, we were able to employ over 2,500 people working as part of our construction division, manufacturing most of the building products and sourcing them primarily from the region in which the country is. If you compare that to an increasingly fractured division of labor and supply chain in other parts of the world, we have rather focused on taking on a more of the process and risk in order to have greater agency over the outcomes. And in doing so, we are looking for new paths to impact, testing, breaking and inventing ways to expand design's influence. This is part of our DNA at MAS. Our name, a model of architecture serving society, as Quilian said, represents that idea. Our non-profit practice, which allows us to unlock new forms of social, political, and financial capital, and work in areas that markets are not yet able to afford them. I will let my colleague Jean-Paul talk specifically about our work in healthcare system, and I'll be back later for more. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Sebuhayi Uwase. I am also from Rwanda. I was inspired by my grandfather, who was a carpenter and who always pulled me to his workbench to show me how he assembled furniture. Similar to Christian, I also wanted to pursue the dream to become an architect, and there was no architecture school. In my first year at university in 2009, I was very lucky. I was going to join engineering, and they announced that they are starting a new school of architecture. And at the time, there were only 30 architects in Rwanda, which included Christian, of course, and all of them were educated abroad. I graduated with the first class of architects in my country's history. My first project took me to Malawi to help build the maternity waiting village, learning the integration of design and construction. And becoming a principal in MAS in our Kigali office with a growing team of Rwandan architects gives me a personal pride and also offers a new trajectory for the Rwandan architecture. I have had the chance to work on many healthcare projects and build upon the work that MAS did at Butaro Hospital. Over the past 15 years, Rwanda has transformed its healthcare delivery model, and life expectancy in the country increased from 26 years in 1994 to 70 years in 2022. Huge improvement. We became one of the first countries to test and deploy a system of community health workers that go out in the community to treat patients. And Rwanda achieved the highest improvement in infant mortality ever registered in the world. MAS has partnered to amplify this success by leveraging building processes as an opportunity for healing as well, and understanding that building hospitals is not only to build spaces to heal people's bodies, but building centers for experience of families and to rebuild the community at the same time. Many of you may know the story of our first project, the Butaro District Hospital, but you may not know that this was the first building in a decade of work in this small community in Rwanda. We designed and built 2 phases of Butaro Doctors Housing, our first design-build project. We then worked on the first outpatient cancer treatment center in the country. With patients and their extended families traveling great distances to seek treatment, our client partners in health asked us to design lodging for them. And lastly, PIH built the University of Global Health Equity on the adjacent hillside to train the next generations of global health practitioners, making this formerly remote district a center of global health in the world. After the success of Butaro Hospital, the Rwandan government asked us to develop guidelines for the district hospitals. And instead of us developing a prototype, we developed a series of standards that could be adapted to different needs and sites. To showcase how to implement this, we were asked to design 2 examples, one urban and one rural. And the Munini District Hospital is in the south on a mountain similar to Butaro. We expanded on our principles of leveraging passive systems to ensure good air quality and create healthy, dignified spaces to deliver health care. And in the capital of Rwanda, Kigali, we designed Nyarugenge District Hospital, which immediately upon opening became the national center to treat COVID-19. But these ideas are not only relevant in Rwanda. Most recently, our team has been working on healthcare projects in Angola, Nigeria, and as far as Bangladesh, where we have designed an over 1 million square foot hospital, a medical school, and a research center with the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Muhammad Yunus, and his organization. We are building much needed care infrastructure, but equally important, we are also developing a methodology that understands the full system of healthcare and brings the best in architectural design to maximize our partners' impacts. I would like to welcome back Patricia Gruits to continue. Thank you.
As a granddaughter of medical workers in Haiti, I joined MAS 10 years ago, initially seeking a way to practice architecture in underserved communities. I began working alongside Jean Paul and Christian and others on the Munini Hospital and the maternity waiting village. We also began to expand our portfolio of work to address systemic issues in other sectors. Projects like the Mabuga Primary School in Rwanda and Alima Conservation School in the Congo challenged us to bring our process and approach developed in our healthcare work to create transformative change in education and conservation on the continent. Through this work, we continued to affirm the methodologies that underpin our work at MAS, asking not what a building is, but what it can do. Leveraging every design decision as an opportunity to affect social and ecological impact. And focusing not only on the impact of the design of our projects, but of the process, particularly among those we endeavor to serve. As MAS and our practice in Rwanda grew, I moved with my family to Kigali to support our partners and our teams in the design of new education facilities, led by organizations who were rethinking how the built environment could amplify their missions. The Ellen DeGeneres campus of the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund had operated in Rwanda for over 50 years. They were conducting critical research and protection of the mountain gorillas out of a rundown office space in the nearest town, about 30 minutes from where they actually practiced in the mountains. Our work with the Fossey Fund started not with an RFP or a design brief, but in that early visioning work, supporting the organization through strategic conversations about their mission and the impact that they wanted to have on the mountain gorillas, the local community, and in the field of conservation. That visioning work, identifying a site, program, design vision, unlocked the funding necessary for the organization to generate support to build a purpose-built campus, thanks to the Ellen Fund. The research campus takes inspiration from Diane's original tent nestled in the forest. The buildings integrate into the landscape, transforming an existing site from agricultural land to a reforest, biodiverse landscape, showcasing gorilla habitat ecologies. The campus utilizes locally sourced materials like volcanic stone and pine wood, and prioritizes water conservation by harvesting rainwater from building roofs and implementing a constructed wetland, the first of its kind to treat wastewater. Our team provided comprehensive services accompanying the Fossey Fund from initial visioning of the project through construction, even acting as the general contractor. Our team designed and produced furniture, signage, and even the exhibition for the project. This is an amazing example of the breadth and depth of what is both possible and necessary when we expand the role of the architect beyond typical phases of design and construction, and instead accompany a partner along early phases of visioning and planning, and stay with them beyond the ribbon cutting. When I returned to the US, I wanted to know how we could apply and think about this expanded model in practice here. In the United States, there's almost 10 million nonprofits who own or occupy buildings to deliver their programs. However, less than half actually see their built spaces as a strategic asset, one that is core to delivering their mission. Many see the design process and what we all do as opaque and confusing. And additionally, the fields of architecture and development in the US, though well established, the traditional business model leaves them out, further cutting them off from the expertise that would help them connect their built space and that investment with the impact they want to have. In an effort to better understand this misalignment, we partnered with two of the largest philanthropic organizations who fund capital projects in the US. And we conducted research with those organizations who had taken on building projects. We analyzed the impact the project had on the users, the organization, the community, and the sector, and gathered insights on how they had implemented their process. We compiled those lessons learned into a set of resources and tools to help other organizations identify the mission for their project, leverage design decisions, and balance that with what is feasible for the organization to build and operate and maintain for the long term. We call these resources purpose-built. They're a series of resources that are available open source to help organizations, communities, funders, and other architects do this work and demystify and untangle the design process, applying a mission-driven approach. Learnings from Purpose-Built continue to shape our work, and it's with that I would love to hand it over to my colleagues in the US who are practicing and sharing how we're expanding this approach across our portfolios and labs here, beginning with Jonathan Evans from our Boston studio.
Thank you, Patricia. Again, I'm Jonathan Evans, very excited to be here. For me, I grew up here. This is my neighborhood. I went to PS 19 a few blocks away on 11th Street. Yeah, all right. And my dad still lives on 14th Street. He's been in the same apartment for 40 years now. So big shout out to Rent Control for that one. And I mean, honestly, I remember when this neighborhood looked a lot different than it is now. And seeing that change is a clear demonstration of both architecture's power and, frankly, its complicity. You know, more often than not, we are charged with reflecting the values and priorities of those in power. And so the question for me is how can we turn the tide? How can design speak for those that have been systemically ignored? You know, how can we use our design power to create positive impact? So again, as Patricia said, we're pushing the conversation deeper than what a building looks like, but actually what a building is doing. The need for high quality, affordable housing is well known. And this has become an area of focus for us as we have over half a dozen projects and over 800 units of housing in design and construction currently in our office. And in each of them, we're really trying to push the status quo, trying to create purpose-built projects positioned for positive impact. And looking at a specific example, there's a growing acute need for affordable housing opportunities for seniors. With the J.J. Carroll project, we're designing under this mandate of aging in community, and that's distinct from this idea of aging in place. Here, a focus on community really responds to isolation and loneliness, which have been identified as very key public health risks for seniors. And you know, generally with multifamily housing, the economically driven conventions of the typology reign supreme. You know, here we challenge the typical double-loaded corridor building, breaking the scale of it down into more manageable clusters of units. These clusters are then thoughtfully arranged to create enhanced wayfinding and be sensitive to the needs of residents facing dementia. And then they then plug into a variety of social spaces at a range of scales, both inside and outside of the building. A highlight of which is an intergenerational play area that is designed for the enjoyment of residents and children in the surrounding community. So again, we're trying to strengthen this link between community and health, and focusing on healthy buildings influence our material choices and building systems for the building as well. So also in Boston, we're in the home stretch of a pretty amazing memorial. We're partnering with Hank Willis Thomas and his team on the Embrace, a memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. This memorial spatializes an iconic photograph of an embrace between the two. Essentially, it shifts the emphasis from Dr. King as a singular hero into this idea of collective action. The Boston Common is the oldest public park in the country. This makes it ever more and what it represents at this place that is so central to Boston's identity. The memorial, again, confidently affirms the place for stories not often told, reflecting the importance of those often cast aside. Made up of over 1,300 pieces of granite, the plaza evokes traditions of African-American quilt making and metaphorically alludes to Dr. King's garment of destiny. And further, 65 Boston civil rights leaders are honored with bronze plaques within the plaza. So again, through this work, we're trying to meet the moment, and we're trying to create an architecture that emotes. We're not here to just make pristine artifacts. For us, the architecture is the method. And through our process, we're trying to push our projects to speak to our values and aspirations and make the change we want to see. And with that, I'd like to welcome Jadi Amazi to the stage.
Thank you, Jonathan. As a native Bostonian, it is truly meaningful to me to see this project that celebrates Black love landing on the Boston Common. So I'm very honored to be part of the team working on that. Good evening, everyone. Okay, thank you. Some of you know. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, call and response. My name is Jadi Amazi, and I joined Mass Design Group almost 5 years ago. And outside of architecture, I am a spoken word artist and community organizer who has been curating events for over the past 15 years. So call and response is very important to me. The work that I do at Mass is serendipitous as an overlap of storytelling and space making. For the past 2 years, I've been cultivating our work as the director of the Public Memory and Memorials Lab, and that is a portfolio of work that asks the question of whose stories are being told in our public landscapes, and more importantly, whose stories are being denied. In 2021, the Monument Lab published a national monument audit of nearly 50,000 monuments with several key findings. One being that the story of the United States as told by our current monuments misrepresents our history. So in our work, we are asking how can spatializing memory inspire collective action for generations to come? How can our public realm be reimagined to celebrate the multitudes of those who have shaped our society and expand our understanding of collective history? Our work in the U.S. Public Memorial space began in partnership with Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative on the design of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Unlike other countries such as Rwanda, the U.S. has done very little to recognize the lasting societal damage perpetuated by our long history of slavery, including but certainly not limited to the racial terrors of lynching. EGI documented more than 4,000 racial terror lynchings in 12 southern states between Reconstruction and World War II. And this work recognized the need for a memorial that spatialized truth-telling. The structure suspends 800 core-tin steel monuments representing the counties in the US where lynchings took place, and each is engraved with the names of its victims. Duplicates of these monuments lie outside, and the corresponding counties are invited to engage in this process of acknowledgement by claiming their monument and placing it as a marker in their own community. It was at the opening of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice that our team had the distinct pleasure of meeting Pam Bosley and Annette Nance Holt. And these two mothers inspired us to create a memorial to victims of gun violence, which we all know is an ongoing epidemic in this country. In collaboration again with artist Hank Willis Thomas, we created 4 glass houses, each composed of 700 bricks, representing the number of Americans that are killed on a weekly basis due to gun violence in this country. We invited family members to contribute objects that best represent the passions, interests, and personalities of their loved ones. We were focused on representing the individuals and not reducing them to statistics. The memorial is currently at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. And following this project, we formally established the Public Memory and Memorials Lab at Mass in 2020, thanks to initial funding from the Mellon Foundation's Monuments Project. So over the past 2 years, we've had the opportunity to work with a number of project partners, and I'll share with you all just a few here. In downtown Houston, Texas, we are working with Commissioner Rodney Ellis on a 3-block park that seeks to engage the community in themes of restorative justice through art and civic space. Harris County has initiated the process to be one of the first counties to reclaim their duplicate marker from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Connecting sites across the Mississippi Delta to Chicago, we are in partnership with the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, as well as the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley Institute, to tell the story of Emmett Till and how his murder sparked the civil rights movement. And returning back to Montgomery, we are collaborating with artist and activist Michelle Browder to honor the mothers of gynecology, Anarka, Betsy, and Lucy, with the Health and Wellness Museum and Clinic at the site that was previously owned by J. Marion Sims, the so-called father of gynecology who experimented on enslaved subjects. These projects represent a sampling of the project partners we're working with across the US to expand the narratives of our public realm. Through advocacy, accompaniment, research, and engagement, we are unearthing opportunities to tell important stories and evoke dialogue, healing, and reconciliation. I will now pass it to my colleague, Jeffrey Mansfield, whom I've collaborated with closely on this work.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah. I'm Jeffrey. Are we good with the microphone? Check, 1, 2. Okay. Hi, I'm Jeffrey Mansfield. I often will say that I'm a child of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It became a law at roughly the same time as I started my education. I grew up going to schools for the deaf. I also grew up in an environment of remnants of the idea around deaf and disability that saw schools for the deaf placed at the margins of our society. That margin society displacement shows the attitude towards disability in our society today. You know, through our work on the architecture of health, the book, and also the exhibition at Cooper Hewitt, what I always knew instinctively became quite clear, that deaf schools and spaces of disability share the same lineage with other types of exclusion within prisons, state hospitals, and Native American boarding schools. So let's go back to the point that I'm trying to make here, that our built environment is systematically disabled and disenfranchised within our community. For this reason, disabled people actually are born designers. We are constantly redesigning a world not designed for us. Deaf Space and Disability Justice Design Lab at Mass works to uplift the lived experience of deaf and disabled communities. We provide design expertise on a multitude of projects within healthcare, housing, and educational realms. I'm also learning through lived experience the idea of truth and justice. It requires us to go beyond what is the legal definition of accessibility. Focusing on codes and rights and laws is significant. However, it's not enough. That typically will lead to a scarcity mindset. In thinking about justice and its meaning, it's not just access to space, but access to citizenship, access to societal movement, to healthcare, to food, and access to joy. Justice is understanding that it's foundational to dignity. Disability justice recognizes that ableism often intersect with other forms of oppression based on race, ethnicity, class, and gender. As a fourth generation Japanese American, I think a lot about this intersectionality and how we access our cultural stories. In 1942, the Executive Order 9066 forced the removal and mass confinement of Japanese Americans, including my grandmother. Like my grandmother, she never shared her experience at the camp. As a result, it left our generation with a profound, incomprehensible intergenerational loss. So going back, we see in North Dakota, there's a little known World War II era Japanese internment camp that currently is on the site of the United Tribes Technical College in Bismarck. With UTTC, we've partnered to design the Snow Country Prison Memorial. This will reuse the original slate roof tiles from the structure that was used in the barracks at the camp to become a curved wall with the names of each person who is interned there. And that curved wall will have a slot in it where visitors can leave paper cranes as a symbol of hope. The curved wall of names also creates a ceremonial circle that is a wonderful, unique symbolism between Japanese American and Native American communities. Similarly, there are a few spaces where we can access cultural stories of deaf and disabled communities. So right now with Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., we are partnering and working on the Louise B. Miller Pathways and Gardens. This will be a memorial that honors the civil rights activist, Louise B. Miller. She fought against desegregation of schools. At the site of a former segregated school We worked very closely with Louise's children and the Center for Black Deaf Studies at Gallaudet University to implement Black Deaf space principles, including spaces for grace, spaces for gathering, and spaces for freedom. The goal here is to transform this site from a space of historical deprivation to a space of abundance. These are two projects I've just shared this evening that we share our beliefs that design can amplify how we access our built environment and our cultural narratives to help forge a more vibrant and healthy community. With that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Caitlin. Caitlin will share that there's always something more that we can do.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Taylor. I am here tonight so proudly representing our Poughkeepsie studio located on Main Street in downtown Poughkeepsie, just an hour and a half north of here in the Hudson Valley. I come to my role as a principal at Mass with dual backgrounds. In addition to being an architect, trained and licensed to design buildings for people, I'm also a farmer. I live on the farm that I own and run with my family, and am raising my 7-year-old son in a farmhouse built in 1693 that is, as my father likes to remind me, composting itself as we speak. My connection to my farm, to the place where I've put down roots, to the seasons and to the soil and to deliciousness, grounds my work. The food system literally shapes the world around us and is being shaped every day by our rapidly changing climate. And the urgency of climate change is very real on my farm. It's felt by me and our team every day. So my lived experience of that impact day to day on my farm informs everything that I do. When we talk about climate change, we mostly hear about energy use and transportation and increasingly buildings and the role that they play in our changing climate. But as you may or may not know, our globalized, industrialized food system accounts for over 40% of all global greenhouse gas emissions around the planet. We simply cannot absorb the shock of our rapidly accelerating climate change without radically redesigning our food systems. In my work, we're asking both how we disrupt the existing industry and also how we design smaller food infrastructure better able to absorb the immediate and unfolding impacts of climate change. And we do so with the understanding, as you've heard from my colleagues, that global challenges most often require local and regional solutions. So from the design of a member-owned cooperative grocery store in Kingston, New York, to the master planning of regional agricultural systems in rural Kansas, to the construction of table landscapes for shared meals, we are testing the role that architecture has in redesigning regional food culture. With many millions of people being displaced by severe weather events in the coming decades, we know that the changing climate will remap this country and the world in ways that are both unknowably complex and also maddeningly predictable. We know that the food system will be a bellwether by which we measure that transformation, and we know that small cities are going to be the sites of incredible change. Through our work in Poughkeepsie and in the region, we have the urgent opportunity to ensure that an inevitable new wave of climate-driven displacement and development can be designed to ensure an inclusive, equitable, and an abundant future. So in Poughkeepsie, we meet the moment, we meet that opportunity every day through our place-based and deeply rooted design process, a hypothesis that we live every day about architecture as a means, not an ends. So through the adaptive reuse of a 19th century factory building on the north side of Poughkeepsie into the new headquarters for one of the oldest environmental nonprofits in the country, Scenic Hudson, we are testing new passive ventilation design to push the environmental performance of historic buildings. Through long-term engagement and investment in latent infrastructure, We are transforming the Fallkill Creek from an ecological liability downtown into a social and cultural asset. And through coalition building and community design processes, we are going far beyond the design itself to bring a Youth Opportunity Union community center to life in downtown Poughkeepsie, and to do so in the vision and in the voice of the people who need the building the most. But we are in an era of converging climate crises, and in a moment where we are facing the reality, the profound reality, that the world our grandchildren are born into will be unrecognizable to us sitting here today. This is the challenge of our time. And there are countless ways in which the context and the work in Africa is different than in the US. And because of that, it would be very easy for us to stay inside of the scarcity mindset, cataloging those differences in defense of what's not possible. But with that in mind, I'm going to pass it back to my amazing colleague, Christian, to share one final story with you all before we go to questions, which is about a project that has done so much in the last few years to teach us what is possible when we design with a fierce, radical hope in our abundant future. So, Christian.
Thanks, Kathleen. It is not easy to think in abundance, as Kathleen just said. Believers, we know. We just went through a long time of work. But it's not impossible if we are intentional. I want to share this project as one of the most ambitious projects that we've worked on, as an example of what we can do when we bring a mindset of abundance. A project that pursues systemic change with a comprehensive project delivery model, where food systems, education, leadership, entrepreneurship, and public health come together in the first climate positive campus of its kind in the world, as far as we know. The Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, I'll be referring to it as RICA, is a program of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation and was developed to provide an immersive education to train agriculture entrepreneurs. The campus is made of up to 69 buildings across 3,400 acres. In the last 50 years, Rwanda's land has almost entirely converted to agricultural production to feed and nourish the population that has tripled. And in the next 30 years, we expect it to double. Rwanda, like many densely populated countries on mainland Africa, projects that a fifth of its population faces food insecurity. So there's an urgent need to find better ways to not only feed, but nourish this increasing population. At the same time, we need to ensure that we conserve and protect the ecological systems and biodiversity that we so depend on. So for this purpose-built project, the mission became One Health, a focus on the interdependence of human, animal, and ecologic health, a central tenet of RICA and conservation agriculture in general. A mass team of over 100 people, designers, architects, engineers, managed the project, providing master planning, architecture, engineering, furniture design, manufacturing, as well as curriculum support services. We worked to identify material sources, labor, makers, as well as traditional farming practices that will inform the development of this campus. We pushed really hard a climate positive and regenerative design approach to the utmost limit that we could. The foundations of most of these buildings are made of stone. Walls are made of earth as much as we could make them. Roof systems are made from timber, and roof cladding from local terracotta fired using agricultural waste. All of these systems and materials choices combined to reduce the embodied carbon of the project. The designs were developed to create comfortable spaces that could rely on passive cooling and lighting. We worked on this together with our longtime collaborators from TransSolar, and together working with Arup, we developed water, waste, and energy systems that are entirely off-grid. The landscape design and reforestation master plan will offset the embodied carbon, making this a carbon sink within 20 years. For the interior spaces, from lecture halls to dorm rooms, our furniture team designed over 200 unique pieces and worked with 85 different artisans and cooperatives to manufacture each and every one of them. We estimate that 90% of the construction design materials by weight came from Rwanda, and our construction team of over 1,300 people from Rwanda mostly worked together to build and complete this project. And when it was all said and done, we think about $16 million was invested into the regional economy through the use of the local labor, supply, and our own design teams. We do hope that this project can transform what we can expect and accept, not only in Rwanda, but in the world, from our own work and interventions. And that in the future, we believe we can build with local regenerative materials, and more importantly, create great architecture. Thank you.
First of all, as people start getting settling in, I think they deserve one more round of applause. Just that was amazing. Thank you. It really was great to see a lot of work that I've seen in the past, and see the kind of personalities behind that work, and how it really seems to be driven by some of these. I'm gonna ask a couple of questions and then we'll open it up. I know it's a little bit later, but we'll try to move along pretty quickly. So one of the first questions that I had is a set of amazing work. It's obvious that one of the things that Mass is doing without doing it is almost redefining some of the skills that a designer has that are necessary to be a designer, an architect, a landscape architect, an engineer, etc. And being that we're in a school, I work at a school, I'm wondering a little bit, maybe a couple of people, maybe from Rwanda and the US, can share some of the skills that you have developed over time, that you have found in the job that we're not taught, and can we teach them at school? Something like that. I'm curious about how you all are seeing the emerging designer through the work you're doing.
Christian, do you want to start that?
I'm going to repeat the question to make sure I understand correctly. So you're saying some of the skills that we've picked up doing this type of work that we don't think are taught in school. Exactly. I'll say the top one on my mind is negotiation skills. It takes an incredible amount of negotiating and convincing and begging for people in different powers around projects and opinions of how our work should be done so that we can realize these projects, and requires us to be equipped with, I think, arguments that are translatable, how do you say this? That you can translate in other people's languages, people that are not architects. I like to say that architects are great at talking to one another. We understand one another very well, but we're terrible at conveying our most interesting ideas to the general public, or people that have other interests in a higher priority than what we want to put forward through this work. So that translation, I think, it has really been difficult for me to learn and understand.
I might add to that. I think a lot of the work that we do is beyond what most architects, I think, are taught in school, or even what most architects practice. You know, responding to an RFP or competition, or even just to a client's definition of what their project is, often isn't how projects come to us. They are not baked with a design brief and a set of rules. Oftentimes, even just the systems in which those projects are happening aren't fully developed or aren't fully known. And so a lot of the work that we do and the skill sets that we have is to really accompany these partners along the way with whatever type of support they really might need, whether that's strategic thinking up front, helping them understand the impact that a building could have on their organization or on their community, helping them connect that with design decisions. And I think where we often found ourselves growing and evolving into having a team of engineers, a team of furniture makers, a team that is actually building the projects in Rwanda, is because there weren't the natural kind of handoffs that sometimes we rely on, I think, wrongly here in the United States. We wrongly assume someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going, a structural engineer is going to design the project that I put on paper. Someone else is going to select and build the furniture. Someone else is going to build it. And I think where we learned a lot in Rwanda is that that assumption is wrong. And if we don't do that work, if we don't create that sort of warm handoff or do the work ourselves, it's not going to happen. And I think what we're learning in the United States is also some of our assumptions that the systems work is wrong. And we need to redesign those systems.
Thank you so much. You know, just going back to the question around negotiation, which seems interesting. You are 27 principals, 200 employees. I'm curious a little bit about again, thinking about the practice structures, how you all negotiate amongst yourselves. How are decisions made? How are both principals and the larger employee group part of that decision making?
I'll start. I mean, I think what really binds, I think, the 27 principals together, and really our entire organization, is a lot of shared values and beliefs about how we practice and why we're practicing. And so having that core gut feeling, or that goal, that gut motivation, that core motivation, I think really binds us together to make the decision making fairly easy. We're not wrestling over big issues that are against our values, our personal values. The 27 principles, I can't imagine not having one of them, even though it seems like a ridiculous number. And the way that we structure ourselves really is quite simply that we have, 5 studios, one in Rwanda, one in Poughkeepsie, one in Boston, one in Santa Fe, and our landscape team that sort of works globally. And each one is structured to really allow a lot of the decision-making that happens for those teams and those partners to happen at the local level. So we can respond really quickly to the needs of our teams and communicate with them about, and involve them in the decision-making that's happening on the projects we take on the work that we do together. And so I think there's some understanding too that as a nonprofit we have a board of directors, right? Well, actually, I'd say now we also have a co-executive director team of Christian, myself, and Alan Ricks, which also starts to distribute and share some of the decision-making as well as the accountability. And then we're upheld by our board of directors, who's a volunteer organization, or volunteer to direct and uphold the mission of Mass. And so I think there's like these levels of decision-making and consultation and information sharing that allows us to kind of successfully communicate and also still collaborate and look for ways that we aren't so rigid in our studios and in our silos.
And the question that I typically, when this kind of work gets presented, how do you fund it, right? Like, I'm sure you have sometimes people that come to you, may have a project, but they may not have the funds right away. And I'm curious about how do both the nonprofit model, what advantages that brings to your practice, as well as how does the money come about? How does it work?
Yeah, I can certainly start there and invite others to jump in, but most of our project partners have never designed or built an architectural project before, and a lot of them are nonprofit organizations that have limited resources but really have remarkably transformative ideas that need to be realized. And so as a nonprofit organization, we are able to leverage philanthropy and grants and access to other resources that we can then redistribute to these nonprofit organizations, and in doing so, unlock the social and financial capital that then allows these projects to be realized. And so just this year alone, we will have donated $3.5 million in services with organizations that has then allowed for, the creation of design opportunities and design services. And a lot of the projects that I spoke about earlier, actually, all of them, rather, the ones that I listed, are made possible by this nonprofit structure. And so it's, again, through tapping into resources into our networks as a nonprofit organization that really allows us to kind of fuel the way that we work and the processes that we're talking about in terms of investment in the early stages, in the visioning, allowing us to take the time to do the translation, through architecture to other folks and communicate in ways that is impactful for them. So it's certainly, at least from certainly the perspective of the Public Memory and Memorial Lab, makes the work possible.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask one last question so we can open it up. I'm sure there are a lot of interesting and kind of burning thoughts out there that we want to get to. The last question I have is, I'm wondering if you all have thought about what the model is showing you what the future could be. And what I mean by that is, for example, how big can it get? Is 400, 500? Is it a system that allows kind of self-regulation to the point that it could be growing, more countries, more principles, and more kind of distributed models of working with the infrastructure kind of finding funding models? So I'm curious about if as you think of the future, what you are thinking.
Yeah. How big can we get? Well, I don't have a direct answer to that question, but I will say, oftentimes, we have to work in response to our partners' needs and mission of the project. It's how we expand our office to deliver upon projects, and the ambition of our partners is something we really keep in the back of our minds and in the front of our minds as well. Earlier this evening, Christian and Patricia, they talked about their work that we've been doing with furniture design with Mass Made, and our construction company, Mass Build, in Rwanda. And this has grown and scaled. And this shows that we work agilely to meet the needs of the project and the mission of what we want to see built in our communities. And so with that, I also talked this evening about Deaf Space and Disability Justice Design Lab, Jadi, and Jonathan also commented on the Public Memory and Memorial lab. We also have Sustainability of Native Communities Design Lab, led by Joseph Kunkel. We also have Food Systems Design Lab by Caitlin. And we also have a Friend Cities Design Lab that works with the Poughkeepsie office. And so these labs really are an opportunity for us to explore some of the most critical issues that impact our built environment currently. Projects that we take on typically cut across many of these themes, and they address some of the most urgent topics and themes in our society and world today: housing crisis, climate change, public health. And so it's interesting to look at this and explore how we design and make systems and approaches that can scale and be replicated, and our office and organization grows in kind.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna invite, there's a couple of microphones right there. I'm sure that folks have some questions. I have a couple other, I can ask one more, but I wanna give an opportunity if I see people coming down the aisle. So please come down, ask a question, and yeah. Maybe, okay, there we go.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me? Is it working? I don't hear me. So thank you so much for helping us, building the community. I do appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here. Oh my God. So I have a question. Since you're helping people to grow and building community, are you planning on extending this in Middle East, since there are some places in the Middle East, they don't have school, hospitals, or place to stay in, since they lost this, their places in the war?
Thank you for your question. I just want to repeat it back to you just because of the microphone. You were saying, would we be working in the Middle East where there's similar types of issues and needs?
Yeah.
I think it's a really great question, and I think builds off of the answer Jeff just gave to how we grow and how we might evolve over time. I mean, I think where we're really driven is to seek out where there is a need and where there really is a large systemic issue that we feel like we can both have an impact and also have the thought leadership to actually, serve the communities in that way. The project that actually John Paul, you talked about in Bangladesh is an example of one of the ways in which we are working outside of the African continent. And it's interesting to think about ways that we might be able to grow and partner.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just want to start with an observation. I'm very impressed that 7 people, or a whole 8 people on the stage are just seeming perfectly coordinated. And as an architecture student, I feel like we struggle with like 4 people giving a presentation. So I understand a lot of this is due to these shared values that I think are very clear. But I want to take a step before that and ask a very innocent question. How did all 27 of you meet each other? Because you come from all these different places.
Anyone want to talk about their history? Caitlin, you want to jump in?
I feel like you should all answer the question, but start from who made the first one, then go.
Yeah.
Which would be me to begin with, I think. When I finished school, I went back to Rwanda to work at the first school of architecture that Jean-Paul mentioned. That was my first job after university. And I had the incredible opportunity of meeting Sierra Benbridge. I think she's sitting right here. She was then the head of the department in that school, and she was working for us as well. And she's the one who invited me to join the team. I think that time the team was about 8 people, maybe, more or less. that's how I got connected to Sierra and Alan. That was my first time to meet them.
I can jump in. I mean, I think I applied for a job. And I think that's the reality, is that we all have these incredible stories of how we've met people, and I think we should go around. But that for me, it was, I lived in Boston. I had been working for a great practice, and then was kind of tired of doing the same thing over and over again, and was fortunate enough that down the street was a very kind of fledgling US version of MASS in Boston, and met the team and came on board. But I think there's other sort of more dynamic stories from Jonathan and Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, I know, Quilian, you and I were at the GSD when MASS was kind of being incubated, and I think there was this idea of this sort of value set on the architecture. And I think for me, I worked several places, and as MASS grew and I think started to take on some challenges more domestically, I thought this is a place where I can see myself coming to bear here and being able to sort of take what I've learned to see how we can amplify the work that's being done abroad and then bring them to bear on some of the challenges we face in the US. So it's been a fun ride.
I was building a practice after graduate school where I was getting pretty used to sounding like a bit of a lunatic talking about the intersection between food systems and architecture. And was teaching at Columbia when I met Chris Kroner. We were co-teaching the urbanism studio at GSAP. And in the way that I do, I was ranting about farming and the need to participate in the redesign of our regional food systems. And Chris said, wow, we have a project with a partner, Hudson Valley Farm Hub. You seem to know an awful lot about how to design things on farms in the Hudson Valley. And it felt like everything clicked into place in that moment, where all of a sudden I couldn't imagine being anywhere else with anyone else. So that was right at the moment that Chris and Evelina Knodel and Vrinda Sharma were moving from New York up to Poughkeepsie to start the Poughkeepsie office, start our Hudson Valley studio, and I eagerly jumped on board with that one connection.
For me, I met MASS in 2009 at school. The first architecture school in the country, which Sierra was the head of department. So both Sierra and Christian were both my teachers in school, and I would say as a student who was in the first year of architecture, where there was no other precedents to look at in terms of enriching my knowledge and skills, I was really interested into the work that MASS was doing. And I think, I was attracted to it, and I asked Sierra if I could join as an intern. And in one of the summer, I think that was in 2011, I joined and started working at Butaro, and from then, I'm still there. So, kind of a sweet story.
I, as I said earlier, joined MASS in 2018, so it's almost 5 years, and it was because a friend who was working at MASS and still is at the time texted me and said, MASS is hiring, you should apply. And it was the day before the holiday, and I was like, absolutely not, I'm on a deadline and I'm comfortable, I don't have time for this. And because I said I'm comfortable, I was like, damn it, now I have to apply, because if you're comfortable, you're not moving. And so I applied, and I'm very grateful that I did, because this was in November. And previously in September, I had said to myself, I'm going to give the firm that I'm at one more year to even it out at 5. And after that, I'm leaving the profession altogether so that I can do poetry and community organizing full time. And transitioning to MASS later that February was the best decision I have ever made, because it saved my career as an architect and as a space maker in this capacity. And so it was really a godsend that I got that text and made my way here.
My comment might be a little bit different, but I met everyone at MASS. I think it started with, conversations with many different people. But prior to that, before even joining MASS, I had these conversations, maybe 10 or 15 different members of the MASS team. And for me, there was this idea of community of curiosity I saw, There's these people who are interested in thinking about how architecture and the built environment can actually make an impact. And this conversation is something that we keep coming back together to. This curiosity always keeps us together. We're learning from each other. We're sharing with each other. This community is what really drew me to Mass, the idea of a collective. Everyone is brilliant in their work and they do amazing things, but being able to show up and learn something new from other people is really what makes this a super unique place. And so with that, there's this idea of this regathering, meeting new members of our team, getting together with members who haven't worked with us for quite some time. And there's always this moment of inspiration that I feel. It really signifies how we want to think about the idea of design itself. This idea of this cross-cutting of design that I see, I really just love it.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question. That was a great one. And then thank you all for staying with us.
Hi. Again, obviously, thank you so much. This is very exciting. I was wondering, because all of your projects are so different in their scope and they're so thoughtfully done, how the research process works within the different teams. If you have teams more dedicated to the research that drive it, or if every team is set up in a way where they have similar scopes, so because everything seems so perfectly thought out.
It's really kind. And anyone?
I can start. I mean, I would say that there's no one way to do it. I think every project, every process is different. And I think we certainly try to bring our kind of unique process to each project and meet each partner where they are, because each project needs something different. I think we didn't talk about it here, but one project we're working on now is a library here in East New York in Brooklyn. And for that project, we're starting with the idea of how do we build trust with the community and how do we think about telling narrative and telling stories in different ways. So that has become a completely different process of immersion that's been centered on a lot of film work. So we approach these things in many different ways, and some of the housing work as well that builds on research work that's done by Jadi and others. So we try to find opportunities to really work across our kind of different interest places to just really kind of find a way to really maximize the potential of a project.
I think too, the first project we ever worked on was a hospital, and no one on the team had ever built a hospital before. And so it started with asking questions and not being afraid of the things we didn't know. It was more about figuring out knowing what we didn't know. And so that kind of fundamental questioning and research is something that's embedded in all of our projects. And I think that's what also allows us to do many different typologies, many different scales, many different geographies, is because of that fundamental process of questioning and embedding research and seeking out the experts to do the work.
Thank you so much. Perhaps the last question, and
hi. Poughkeepsie native here. I love all of the work that you guys do everywhere, but obviously I'm a little more personally invested in my hometown in the Hudson Valley. But I was wondering what you guys are sort of learning from stuff like Mass Build and Mass Made in Rwanda, and how maybe you guys are thinking of taking that back stateside. I mean, we don't have abundant volcanic rocks and just laying around, but we've seen how, locally sourced materials, labor, artisans, all that kind of stuff can be really transformational for the local economy. So I wasn't sure what you guys were thinking about. If you're thinking about stuff like that, or if you've encountered roadblocks, building codes, that kind of stuff.
Should I take a stab at that one? Well, I think that you did an amazing job actually sort of answering your own question. The answer is that yes, we are thinking about that and building that intentionally into each of our projects in our Poughkeepsie studio and in all of our US-based work. We are constantly asking ourselves, what is the volcanic stone of this project or of this place? What are the abundant natural resources, the abundant economic resources, the abundant people resources that can be best served and most, that we can bring the most value to through our design process and through the design and construction of the buildings themselves. In service to the idea that the buildings are a means, not an ends, we understand the impact of the work far outside, beyond the scale of the building itself. And that means that on every project, we are pushing the envelope in terms of who is involved and whose handprints are on the materials and where the materials are sourced from, and really trying to embrace the complexity of those questions in a very different context, but do so in a really patient and persistent way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not as sexy as volcanic stone. I mean, it could be really about how we write the project manual to ensure that we have, local, you sort of hire from our radius within a certain distance of the project site, so that we source materials equitably, so that we think about deconstruction instead of demolition of buildings, so we can reuse materials. So I think there are a lot of ways that we can embed it in the process to really kind of push the change we want to see.
Thank you.
With that, are there any last words? If not, I want to thank you, because I think it was mentioned, but this was a choreography. Oh, I'm sorry, last.
I just wanted to say that aside from building materials, there's a wealth of workforce desiring to be a part of these types of projects. I'm a graduate of Pratt Institute, and I now work architecture. I now work in high-end residential. So not only as a student would I have loved the opportunity to be a part of the projects like Mockbee Studio, that since we're at Cooper Union right now and speaking to lots of professors, it would be amazing to see a segment of one person sitting up here that represents your work in schools.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'd hand it to a few of the team up here that are actually actively teaching at the moment. We have a number of people on our team that are teaching and engaging in universities across the globe. I'd also say one of the things and big efforts that I spoke to tonight is about making some of our methodologies and processes open source and accessible, so that we aren't the only mass, and that others are able to take and work in their own communities and build off of the lessons that we're learning and hopefully contribute more. There's enough to go around. There's enough work for us all to do. And so we hope you would join us in seeking that abundance. Thank you.
If I'm allowed a few words, I think I wanted to again elevate this idea of thinking in abundance. I think to what Patricia just said, I think it's important for us to agree on why we're here and what we should collectively aim to do. And then the process of how we do that, we can diverge from one model to another, and that's open to debate. But this idea we have at Mass that our practice is our largest and longest running project, we keep designing and iterating it to respond to this simple idea that we don't exist to solve consequences of problems, but we should resolve the problems themselves. And those problems, whether they're about food insecurity or food systems that have a different set of incentives that makes people unhealthy by because of how they're farmed or how they're served or how they're cooked. Those manifest differently from Africa to the United States, but the problem is still food systems. So we need to fix those food systems. I think to also the question that was asked about construction, some of the problems we talk about that are plagues in the construction industry are consequences of much deeper problems. The bigger problem is the supply chain that allows us to put the architecture together. So I feel like we have a bigger task of reinventing ourselves, how we think, what our role is, and being able to think in the abundant opportunities that exist that help us to address them. And I think we can.
That was beautiful. So I want to thank you again. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for the negotiated choreography that we did up here. And I want to thank again Cooper Union and invite everyone to join us at other Architectural League events. Thank you.